Humanity put a man on the moon, cured diseases, and built the internet, and yet somehow still thinks a cracked mirror on a cruise ship guarantees 7 years of bad luck at sea. Real passengers have tried registering their cabin as its own tax-free country, smuggling dogs inside stuffed animals, and running illegal poker games on board, then acting shocked when security shows up. Get ready for 49 of the dumbest maritime myths and illegal stunts people actually tried to pull off in real life. And some of these are so unhinged you'll question basic human intelligence. Subscribe now, unless you're planning on pulling off number 23 yourself. 1. An old sailor on a cargo ship believed whistling on deck could summon a hurricane. A young deckhand thought this was nonsense and whistled a cheerful tune just to prove him wrong. Within an hour, dark clouds rolled in, and the ship began rocking violently. The old sailor stormed over and accused him of angering the sea. The deckhand tried to argue it was simply a coincidence, but nobody on deck believed him. By the time the storm passed, he had earned a new nickname among the crew. They called him Hurricane Boy for the rest of the voyage. 2. A superstitious fishing captain refused to let bananas on board, convinced they were a disaster magnet. A teenage deckhand secretly packed a banana in his lunch to test the theory. Within minutes, the fishing net snapped, and half the catch spilled back into the sea. The captain spun around and demanded to know who had smuggled fruit onto his boat. The teenager tried hiding the peel behind his back, but the smell gave him away instantly. The rest of the crew refused to speak to him for the entire trip. Even the fish seemed to be avoiding the boat that day. 3. A woman lost an earring in the ship's hot tub and insisted on finder's keeper's law to claim the jacuzzi as hers. An attendant tried explaining the rule did not apply to hotel amenities, but she refused to listen. She sat guarding the hot tub for 3 hours straight. A family waiting for a turn eventually complained to the front desk about her. Security arrived and calmly explained finders keepers was not an actual maritime statute. She left in a huff, still insisting she would look it up later and prove everyone wrong. 4. An old fisherman refused to let a red-headed tourist board his charter convinced she would jinx the crossing. The woman laughed it off and stepped aboard anyway despite his protests. Halfway into the trip, the engine sputtered and the boat drifted for nearly an hour. The fisherman blamed her hair color while frantically checking the fuel line. She calmly pointed out the tank was simply empty and had nothing to do with superstition. He grumbled under his breath, but quietly refilled it from a spare canister. From that day on, he still avoided red-headed passengers entirely. 5. A woman desperate to bring her tiny chihuahua aboard a cruise dressed it as a stuffed animal, and carried it through security. The dog stayed remarkably still as she strolled past the checkpoint with it tucked under her arm. Everything went smoothly until the stuffed animal sneezed loudly in the lobby. A nearby child pointed and shouted that the toy was alive. Staff quickly surrounded her and asked her to open the bag for inspection. She tried insisting it was simply a realistic toy with allergies. Needless to say, the dog was escorted off at the next port. 6. A shipping company skipped the traditional de-naming ceremony when renaming an old fishing vessel to save time. An older sailor on the crew warned them the ship would be cursed for life. The captain brushed it off as old-fashioned nonsense and set sail anyway. Within the first week, they lost engine power twice, and the navigation system glitched constantly. The sailor reminded everyone daily that he had tried to warn them. Eventually, the crew pooled their own money to perform a proper renaming ritual at sea. Strangely, the problem stopped almost immediately after. 7. A young man in a cruise ship casino insisted his winning chips became real currency once the ship crossed into international waters. A dealer politely explained chips could only be redeemed at the casino cage regardless of location. He argued loudly that maritime law made his own rules once they left port. Other passengers gathered around enjoying the free entertainment his confidence provided. Security eventually escorted him to the cage where he reluctantly cashed out like everyone else. He left muttering he would look up the actual law later. Nobody ever heard whether he found anything to support his claim. 8. An old ship captain warned his crew that killing an albatross would doom the vessel to endless misfortune. A young sailor scoffed and accidentally struck one with a fishing line while reeling in his catch. The captain went pale and immediately ordered the crew to prepare for disaster. Within hours, a sudden squall rocked the ship and knocked out half the lighting below deck. The young sailor apologized repeatedly while the crew avoided eye contact with him. The captain kept muttering the bird would haunt them for the rest of the voyage. Somehow they all made it home safely. 9. A passenger facing deportation from a cruise ship sprinted into the chapel and declared he was claiming religious asylum to avoid disembarking. The chaplain calmly informed him a chapel offered no such legal protection anywhere. He refused to leave and sat in the front pew with his arms crossed for hours. Security eventually arrived and stood patiently near the entrance waiting him out. Other passengers wandered in to pray and stepped around the standoff. Eventually hunger won, and he walked out on his own. The chaplain later joked, it was the most eventful sermon he never gave. 10. A cruise line avoided departing on Fridays unless the ship left before noon, following an old superstition among sailors. A first-time traveler booked a late Friday departure without realizing the tradition existed. Crew members grew visibly nervous as boarding continued past the unofficial cutoff. An elderly deckhand kept glancing at his watch, murmuring they were tempting fate. The ship finally left port nearly an hour late due to unrelated delays. The traveler joked the crew seemed more anxious about the schedule than the ocean itself. Despite the grumbling, the voyage went off without a single problem. 11. A large family snuck 3 unbooked relatives aboard a cruise ship by balcony hopping between adjoining cabins during the busy boarding rush. A young cousin acted as lookout while the others climbed carefully from railing to railing above the water. Everything went smoothly until a security officer spotted an extra person during the evening head count. The grandmother tried insisting the newcomer had simply wandered in from another deck by mistake. The officer pointed out he recognized the same face from an earlier photo near the pool. The family was quietly asked to buy proper tickets before reaching the first port. 12. Old sailors believed a ship launched without a crowd cheering was doomed to sink before reaching open water. A shipyard once tried a quiet private launch to avoid publicity for a struggling company. A veteran dock worker warned the silence would curse the vessel for its entire lifetime. Within days of setting sail, the ship suffered a minor engine failure near the coast. Word spread quickly that the silent launch had brought exactly the misfortune everyone feared. The company quietly arranged a small celebration afterward just to calm nervous crew members. The ship ran without issue for years after that. 13. A man on a cruise ship packed a plush bathrobe into his suitcase and argued that international waters meant hotel rules no longer applied. A steward politely asked him to return it before disembarking at the next port. He insisted maritime law gave him ownership the moment the ship crossed 12 nautical miles. The steward calmly explained that no such law existed anywhere in maritime history. Other passengers nearby began laughing as the argument grew louder near the elevator. Security eventually arrived and the robe was quietly returned to housekeeping. He left grumbling that he would research the law himself. 14. Sailors once believed placing coins beneath a ship's mast during construction would protect the vessel from ever sinking. A modern shipbuilder decided to skip the tradition entirely to save time during a rushed project. An older worker on the crew warned that skipping it would invite disaster once the ship set sail. Within its first month, the ship experienced 2 unexpected mechanical failures near the engine room. Crew members began whispering that the missing coins were somehow to blame for the trouble. The company placed coins beneath a replacement part just to ease everyone's nerves. The problem stopped almost immediately. 15. A passenger secretly filmed himself rehearsing a slip and fall near the pool deck twice before staging it in front of staff for a fake lawsuit. A nearby teenager noticed the camera propped against a chair and started recording the rehearsal out of curiosity. When the man finally staged his fall, the teenager's video was already circulating among nearby guests. Staff reviewed the footage and immediately recognized the same exaggerated tumble from earlier that morning. The man tried insisting it was a coincidence that he fell the same way twice. Security escorted him off the deck, while others openly laughed. 16. Old fishing crews long believed that boats painted green were destined for bad luck out on the open water. A young fisherman inherited a green boat from his grandfather and refused to repaint it despite warnings from older sailors. Every time the boat returned with a smaller catch, the older crew members blamed the color immediately. The young fisherman insisted it was simply bad weather and nothing more than coincidence. One older uncle refused to step aboard the boat no matter how many times he was invited. Eventually, the young fisherman repainted it blue, just to keep the peace. 17. A tourist on a cruise ship quietly slipped a ship-branded lifebuoy into his luggage as a souvenir before disembarking at the final port. A crew member doing a routine equipment check noticed one was missing from its usual spot near the railing. Security reviewed hallway footage and spotted the tourist carrying it awkwardly wrapped in a beach towel. He was stopped just before leaving the ship and asked to open his suitcase for inspection. He tried insisting he had simply borrowed it for a photo and forgotten to return it. Staff calmly took it back. 18. Old sailors believed having a woman aboard a ship would anger the sea and summon violent storms during the voyage. A young woman joined a fishing crew for the first time despite older sailors quietly grumbling about the tradition. Within hours of leaving port, dark clouds rolled in and the boat began rocking in rough water. One superstitious uncle on the crew blamed her presence the entire time while frantically checking the ropes. She calmly pointed out storms formed regardless of who happened to be standing on deck. The crew made it back safely, and she returned again. 19. A guest at the ship's bar tried invoking an obscure flag of convenience law to argue he legally owed nothing on his growing tab. The bartender listened patiently while he explained his theory about international shipping regulations in great detail. A nearby couple began filming the exchange, assuming it was some kind of onboard comedy show. The bartender eventually called over a manager who calmly explained that no such law applied to drink tabs anywhere. The guest tried a second explanation involving different maritime terms made up on the spot. He finally agreed to pay using his actual room card. 20. Old sailors avoided departing on the 13th of any month, believing it would tempt fate and doom the voyage from the start. A modern cruise line accidentally scheduled a departure on exactly that date without realizing the old superstitions still lingered among older crew members. Several longtime sailors quietly requested the day off rather than sail under what they considered a cursed departure. The captain brushed off the concerns and insisted the schedule would not change for tradition. The voyage left port slightly delayed due to unrelated mechanical checks that morning. The rest of the trip went smoothly. 21. A man on a cruise proposed to a total stranger just to snag the newlywed package discount being advertised at the guest services desk. The woman he approached laughed nervously, assuming it was some kind of prank, until he pulled out an actual ring box. Staff at the desk stared in confusion as he explained his plan in surprising detail. The stranger politely declined, but admitted the offer was the most creative pickup attempt she had ever witnessed. He shrugged and asked if the discount applied to friendship packages instead. Staff informed him no such package existed on the ship. 22. Old sailors believed a ship's bell ringing on its own without anyone touching it was a warning sign of an approaching death on board. A crew member once heard the bell chime late at night with no wind or movement nearby to explain it. He rushed to tell the captain, who dismissed it as nothing more than loose rigging. The next morning, an elderly passenger reported feeling unusually unwell after hearing the same eerie chime from her cabin. Word spread quickly among the crew, who avoided the deck near the bell for the rest of the voyage. The passenger recovered fully. 23. A passenger quietly gathered a stack of life jackets from empty cabins, planning to resell them online as authentic cruise souvenirs. A housekeeping staff member doing inventory noticed several missing during a routine safety check before departure. Security reviewed hallway footage and found him carrying an oddly bulky duffel bag toward his room. He was stopped at the gangway and asked to open the bag for inspection before leaving the ship. He tried insisting he simply liked collecting maritime safety equipment as a hobby. Staff calmly confiscated the jackets while nearby passengers watched the exchange with obvious amusement. 24. Old sailors believed hearing a rooster crow aboard a ship meant certain shipwreck was coming before the voyage even began. A fisherman once brought his pet rooster along for company during a long trip out to sea. When the bird crowed loudly at sunrise, the older crew members immediately began preparing for disaster despite calm weather. The fisherman tried explaining the rooster simply crowed every morning out of habit regardless of location. One nervous deckhand refused to leave his cabin for the rest of the day just in case. The trip ended without a single incident. 25. A young man flew a small drone over a restricted crew-only deck, purely to capture dramatic footage for his social media page. Crew members below noticed the buzzing sound and quickly radioed security about the unauthorized flight overhead. Security located him standing near the pool, still filming with his phone pointed toward the sky. He tried explaining the footage would look incredible once edited with music and slow-motion effects. The officer confiscated the drone and reminded him restricted areas existed for actual safety reasons. He spent the rest of the cruise complaining that his content had been ruined. 26. Old sailors believed a cracked mirror aboard a ship guaranteed 7 years of bad luck for anyone who saw their reflection in it. A passenger accidentally knocked one off the cabin wall while unpacking and watched it shatter across the floor. His roommate immediately panicked and refused to look in any mirror for the remainder of the trip. The passenger insisted it was simply an old wives' tale with no real connection to actual luck. Later that same day, he lost his room key twice and missed dinner reservations entirely. His roommate reminded him for the rest of the cruise. 27. A man quietly sold homemade perfume out of his cabin, advertising it to other passengers as genuine duty-free merchandise. A curious guest asked where exactly the perfume had been manufactured, given its unusual scent and cloudy appearance. He hesitated before admitting he mixed it himself, using leftover shampoo bottles and essential oils from home. Word spread quickly, and several passengers who had already purchased bottles demanded refunds immediately. Staff eventually caught wind of the unofficial business and asked him to stop selling anything aboard. He spent the rest of the cruise avoiding anyone who had bought a bottle. 28. Old sailors refused to say the word drowning aloud, believing that speaking it would somehow cause it to actually happen at sea. A young deckhand jokingly used the word during a card game just to see how the older crew would react. Several sailors immediately stood up and insisted he take it back before something terrible occurred. He laughed it off, but agreed to say something else just to keep the peace among the group. Later that night, unusually rough waves rocked the ship for nearly an hour straight. The older sailors reminded him of his mistake afterward. 29. A man attempted a citizen's arrest on his cabin neighbor after a heated dispute broke out over loud karaoke singing late into the night. He marched to the front desk, insisting maritime law gave passengers the authority to detain disruptive neighbors themselves. Staff calmly explained that citizens' arrests were not something guests could legally perform aboard a cruise ship. The neighbor overheard the commotion and offered to lower the volume just to end the argument peacefully. The man reluctantly agreed, but still insisted he had been technically correct about his rights. Staff quietly closed the incident report. 30. A stowaway hid inside an empty lifeboat for 2 full days before anyone finally noticed several bags of snacks mysteriously disappearing from storage nearby. A crew member doing routine maintenance eventually discovered him curled up comfortably beneath a folded tarp. The stowaway explained he simply wanted a free vacation and figured nobody checked the lifeboats very often. Security escorted him to the bridge where the captain radioed ahead to arrange his removal at the next port. Other crew members joked that he had picked the least comfortable hiding spot on the ship. He was handed over to port authorities. 31. Old sailing crews once believed that bringing a black suitcase aboard a ship would bring misfortune to everyone on the voyage. A businessman boarded with a sleek black suitcase, completely unaware of the superstition still whispered about among older deckhands nearby. Within hours, the ship's entertainment system glitched, and dinner service ran nearly an hour behind schedule. An older crew member quietly blamed the suitcase while avoiding the businessman's cabin hallway for the rest of the trip. The businessman found the whole thing hilarious and began carrying the suitcase around just to watch reactions. Half the crew avoided him. 32. A guest at the front desk insisted his onboard credit balance was actually legal tender, that staff were obligated to redeem for real cash. The clerk calmly explained that onboard credit could only be used for purchases made aboard the ship itself. He argued loudly that unused credit was essentially owed money under basic consumer protection principles. A small line of curious passengers formed behind him, enjoying the unexpected debate near the gift shop. A manager was eventually called over and repeated the same explanation using simpler language. He left grumbling, but quietly spent the balance on chocolate before exiting. 33. Old sailors believed pointing directly at the moon from the deck of a ship was considered extremely bad luck out on the water. A teenager on a family cruise pointed excitedly at a full moon while showing his little sister the view from the railing. An elderly deckhand nearby gasped and told him to apologize to the sky before something terrible happened. The teenager laughed but played along and offered a mock apology just to humor the older man. Later that night, the ship experienced a brief power flicker during the evening show. The deckhand reminded him about it afterward. 34. A man attempted to pry a brass fixture off the ship's railing, planning to sell it later as genuine maritime scrap from a cruise liner. A crew member doing an evening patrol noticed him struggling with a small wrench near the upper deck railing. He was stopped before loosening it and asked to explain what he was doing out there. He claimed he was simply testing whether the railing felt sturdy enough for his liking. Security clearly did not believe the explanation and confiscated the wrench on the spot. He spent the rest of the cruise being watched by staff. 35. A passenger faked seasickness during the first morning of the voyage, specifically hoping staff would move him into a free, upgraded cabin. He groaned dramatically at the front desk, claiming the rocking motion was unbearable in his current room location. Staff sympathetically offered him motion sickness medication instead of the upgrade he had clearly been hoping for. He reluctantly accepted the pills but continued complaining loudly near other passengers waiting in line. A nearby crew member later spotted him dancing energetically at the pool party just hours afterward. Staff quietly noted the miraculous recovery with obvious amusement. 36. Old sailors believed that clapping near the engine room could somehow jinx the ship's machinery and cause mechanical trouble later in the voyage. A curious child on a family cruise clapped loudly near the engine room door just to test the strange superstition for himself. A nearby engineer jokingly told him to stop before he broke something important below deck. Later that same afternoon, one of the ship's elevators briefly stopped working between floors for several minutes. The engineer jokingly blamed the child every time he saw him walking around the ship. The child proudly claimed responsibility every time. 37. A guest quietly ran an unofficial barbershop out of his cabin, offering haircuts to other passengers for cash payments under the table. Word spread quickly among guests looking for a quick trim without paying the higher prices at the ship's official salon. A crew member eventually noticed clumps of hair collecting near his cabin door during routine hallway cleaning. Staff politely asked him to stop after receiving a few complaints from the actual salon manager. He argued that his prices were simply more reasonable for budget-conscious travelers. He agreed to stop, but kept his scissors just in case. 38. Old maritime folklore claimed that cats kept aboard ships could somehow sense and predict oncoming storms before they actually appeared on the horizon. A fishing crew brought along a scruffy cat named Biscuit, who suddenly became agitated one otherwise calm afternoon at sea. The older sailors immediately began preparing for rough weather, despite completely clear skies stretching in every direction. Within an hour, dark clouds rolled in unexpectedly, and the boat rocked through a short but intense squall. The crew treated Biscuit like a hero for the voyage and gave him extra fish. Younger sailors called it coincidence. 39. A tourist insisted that maritime law allowed him to settle a heated disagreement with another passenger through a formal duel on the open deck. The other passenger stared at him in confusion, assuming it was some kind of elaborate joke about their earlier argument. Security was quickly called over after the tourist began seriously suggesting rules and weapon options for the supposed duel. An officer calmly explained that no such maritime tradition existed anywhere in modern shipping regulations. The tourist reluctantly agreed to settle things with a simple handshake instead. Others admitted it was the strangest argument they had witnessed. 40. Old sailors believed turning a hatch cover upside down aboard a ship would somehow summon bad weather for the remainder of the voyage. A new deckhand accidentally flipped one while cleaning without realizing the old superstition still mattered to several older crew members nearby. An experienced sailor rushed over and quickly flipped it back while muttering something about tempting fate unnecessarily. Later that afternoon, a sudden gust of wind knocked over several deck chairs near the pool area. The older sailor reminded the deckhand about the incident for the rest of the trip. The deckhand quietly avoided hatch covers afterward. 41. A man staged a fake mutiny reenactment on the ship's main deck for a viral video complete with a costume sword and dramatic shouting. Passengers nearby stopped and stared, assuming an actual emergency was unfolding right in front of them. Security rushed over within minutes, after receiving several panicked calls about a disturbance near the pool. He tried explaining it was simply content for his growing social media following. The officer calmly escorted him off the deck, while confiscating his prop sword for the rest of the trip. He spent the remainder of the cruise being quietly watched by staff. 42. Old sailors avoided starting any new voyage on a Sunday, believing it would bring bad fortune for the entire trip ahead. A modern ferry company once scheduled a special departure on exactly that day, without realizing the tradition still lingered among older crew members. Several longtime sailors quietly grumbled about the timing while preparing the ship for its usual morning routine. The captain brushed off their concerns, insisting schedules were based on logistics rather than outdated folklore. The ferry left port slightly late due to unrelated loading delays that morning. The older sailors whispered that the delay proved their point. 43. A father secretly swapped wristbands with his teenage son so the boy could sneak drinks from the ship's main bar undetected. The bartender noticed the same face returning far too often for someone supposedly under the legal drinking age. He quietly flagged the wristband number and alerted security about the unusual pattern near closing time. The teenager was stopped mid-order and asked to confirm his actual age on the spot. He nervously admitted the swap while his father pretended not to notice from a nearby table. Staff quietly deactivated both wristbands until the family sorted things out properly. 44. Old sailors believed a ship's cat walking off the gangplank before departure was a clear warning sign to cancel the entire voyage. A fishing crew's cat named Salty wandered off the boat just minutes before they were scheduled to leave the dock. Several older sailors immediately began arguing that the trip should be postponed until the following morning. The captain dismissed the idea entirely and ordered the crew to retrieve the cat and prepare for departure. Halfway through the trip, the boat's radio briefly lost signal for nearly 20 minutes. The older sailors reminded everyone about Salty for weeks afterward. 45. A man quietly ran an unlicensed poker game out of his cabin, taking a small cut of every winning pot from other passengers. Word spread fast among guests looking for higher stakes than the ship's official casino allowed at its tables. A crew member noticed an unusual number of guests entering and leaving the same cabin late into the night. Security eventually knocked and found cards, chips, and cash scattered across the small cabin table. He tried explaining it was simply a friendly game among new friends he had made. Staff shut it down, reminding him gambling required a license. 46. Old sailors believed nailing a horseshoe to the mast with its points facing up would catch good luck for the voyage ahead. A modern shipbuilder decided to include one during construction purely as a nod to the old traditions sailors still valued. A new crew member accidentally installed it upside down without realizing the specific orientation actually mattered to anyone. An older sailor noticed almost immediately and insisted the luck was now pouring out instead of collecting inside. The crew quickly flipped it the correct way just to be safe before departure. The voyage went smoothly without a single hiccup. 47. A woman at the ship's bar argued that crossing time zones during the cruise entitled her to double happy hour pricing for the evening. The bartender politely explained that happy hour simply followed the ship's onboard clock, regardless of any time zone changes. She insisted her phone showed 2 different times, which she believed meant 2 separate happy hours had occurred. A nearby couple watched the exchange with growing amusement while sipping their own regularly priced drinks. The bartender eventually offered her a single complimentary drink just to end the debate peacefully. She left satisfied, believing she had won. 48. A man smuggled small fireworks aboard a cruise ship, planning a dramatic proposal on the top deck under the night sky. He lit one quietly near the railing, expecting a simple sparkling display for his girlfriend standing beside him. Instead, the fireworks sputtered loudly and set off the ship's sensitive fire alarm system throughout several decks. Crew members rushed toward the area, assuming an actual emergency had broken out somewhere on board. He tried explaining through the chaos that it was simply meant to be a romantic gesture gone wrong. His girlfriend still said yes despite the brief evacuation around them. 49. A passenger attempted to register his cabin as a personal tax-free enclave, specifically to avoid paying standard gratuities at the end of the cruise. He presented a handwritten document to guest services claiming his cabin existed outside normal onboard financial regulations. The staff member reviewing it struggled to keep a straight face while reading through his surprisingly detailed reasoning. He insisted his research was accurate and that maritime tax law clearly supported his unusual claim. A manager was called over and calmly explained gratuities were simply a standard part of every guest's experience. He reluctantly paid while still muttering. And that wraps up 49 of the most ridiculous maritime myths and illegal acts passengers actually tried to get away with. From duels over karaoke to tax-free cabins that definitely do not exist under any maritime law ever written. If any of these had you laughing out loud or shaking your head at the sheer audacity of these people, then smash that like button right now. Subscribe to BrainFumble and turn on notifications so you never miss the next batch of unbelievable stories. Share this with a friend who needs a laugh today. Now drop a comment and tell me which point was the most ridiculous one for you.